The air in the sterile conference room crackled with a tension thicker than the stale coffee aroma. David, seated across the polished mahogany table, had been preening, his posture radiating a confident, almost arrogant satisfaction. He was about to sign the divorce papers, sealing his triumphant exit from our 15-year marriage, and so he thought, my life. That's when his lawyer, a lean man with a perpetually worried frown, leaned in, his voice dropping to a barely audible murmur. He whispered 5 words, just 5 simple, innocuous words that would unravel Vincent's perfectly constructed world. And I watched as his face, that familiar, smug, self-satisfied mask I'd stared at across countless breakfast tables for half my life, drained of all color, turning an ashen white. His hands, which had been resting confidently on the stack of documents, began to tremble uncontrollably, making the very papers he'd been so eager to sign dance like fragile autumn leaves caught in a sudden, violent gust. And me, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, for the first time in 3 long, desolate years, a genuine, unburdened smile touched my lips. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Let me start from the beginning. You need to understand every thread, every subtle twist and turn that led us to that pivotal moment in the mediator's office. You need to understand how a woman everyone, David included, believed had completely lost her mind. A woman they dismissed as broken and defeated had, in fact, been playing the longest, most patient, and most meticulously planned game of her life. My name is Eleanor Albright. I'm 34 years old, and until a mere 3 months ago, I was married to Preston Hayes. 15 years. 15 years of marriage. That's a lifespan longer than most fleeting Las Vegas romances, more enduring than the very existence of some small, newly formed countries, and unequivocally, undeniably, far longer than my patience should ever have endured. But I am, by nature and by heritage, a stubborn woman. It's a trait deeply ingrained, inherited directly from my formidable grandmother. I first encountered David when I was 17, a whirlwind of youthful ambition and restless energy. I had graduated high school a year early, not because I possessed some extraordinary genius, but because I was intensely practical, driven by a fierce desire for independence, and frankly, desperate to escape the suffocating confines of my parents' house. It was a home filled with good intentions, but also stifling expectations and a quiet, persistent sadness. I landed a job at Whitman and Stone Law Firm as a file clerk, a position that paid minimum wage and guaranteed a daily collection of paper cuts, but it was mine. My own money, my own responsibility. By 18, I had already begun my ascent, working my way up to a legal assistant. I had a knack for details, a precise understanding of numbers, and perhaps most importantly in that environment, a cultivated ability to keep my mouth shut and my eyes wide open, absorbing everything. David was 24 when our paths intersected at a bustling client event. He was effortlessly charming, radiating an intoxicating blend of ambition and self-assuredness, his head teeming with grandiose dreams of constructing a colossal real estate empire. He spoke about the future not as something yet to be achieved, but as an already established dominion, a success story simply awaiting his grand entrance to claim it. I'm going to build something incredible, he'd declared, his eyes alight with a vision I, in my youthful naivete, found utterly captivating. My response, delivered with a shy smile, was, I'll help you file the paperwork. Classic romance, wouldn't you say? We were married when I was 19, a whirlwind ceremony fueled by youthful optimism. Our son, Caleb, arrived a year later, when I was just 20. I juggled motherhood with a part-time position at the law firm, diligently building up my 401k and meticulously saving every spare dollar. My grandmother, a woman whose wisdom I cherished more than any material possession, had always imparted a crucial lesson. A woman must have her own money. Not secret money, she would always clarify, her eyes twinkling, just your own. Something nobody, absolutely nobody, can ever take from you. When I was 23, Vincent's business, after years of struggle and tireless effort, finally experienced its breakthrough moment. He asked me to resign from the law firm and dedicate myself to his company full-time. He painted a compelling picture of necessity. He needed someone to meticulously manage the books, expertly handle clients, flawlessly coordinate with contractors, someone he could trust implicitly, completely. So, without hesitation, I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client liaison, interior decorator for the endless parade of model homes, marketing coordinator, event planner for lavish launches. You name it, I did it. All while raising Caleb, orchestrating the complexities of our household, and somehow managing to keep everyone fed, clothed, and reasonably content. My official title was simply wife. My unofficial title, the one that truly encompassed the boundless scope of my responsibilities, was everything else. For 11 arduous years, I poured every ounce of my energy, my intellect, my very soul into constructing Vincent's dream. And for 11 long years, he reaped the credit, collected the glittering awards, and basked in the unqualified recognition. At every industry event, I was merely Vincent's wife. At every celebratory gala, he would unfailingly thank his diligent team, his wise mentors, his visionary insight. But somehow, inexplicably, he never quite managed to express a word of gratitude to me. Somewhere, in the subtle, imperceptible shift of seasons, things began to change, to subtly sour. He started making significant decisions without even the courtesy of consulting me. His late nights at the office became increasingly frequent, a persistent, unwelcome shadow stretching across our evenings. He began to criticize, picking at the smallest details: the way I dressed, the meals I painstakingly prepared, my supposed lack of ambition. Lack of ambition? I was single-handedly running the entire back office of his burgeoning empire for free, raising his son, and meticulously organizing every aspect of his chaotic life. But sure, I wasn't ambitious enough. Then, 3 months ago, the bomb finally dropped. He arrived home on a crisp Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. His favorite, actually, a testament perhaps to my gluttony for unappreciated effort. He sat me down at the kitchen table, his face devoid of any emotion. Not a flicker of sadness, not a hint of apology, just a cold, businesslike mask. "I want a divorce," he declared, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. And then, without pausing for breath, he continued, "And then, I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Caleb." He delivered the pronouncement with the casual indifference of someone ordering from a menu. "I'll have the assets," he seemed to say, "and hold the child, please. Thanks. Keep Caleb." As if our 15-year-old son, the flesh and blood of our shared life, was nothing more than a leftover pizza. A convenient inconvenience he was graciously permitting me to retain. I just sat there, utterly stunned, staring at him, my mind struggling to process the enormity of his words, the casual cruelty of their delivery. 15 years of shared life, of love, labor, and sacrifice, reduced to a transaction, ending ignominiously at our kitchen table, wedged between the innocuous salt shaker and the butter dish. As if I, too, was just another item he was summarily discarding from his life. What I didn't comprehend in that devastating moment, what I wouldn't uncover until much later, was the chilling extent of Vincent's pre-planning. He had been meticulously orchestrating this exit strategy for months, like a corporate merger. He had already secured the services of Richard Powell, an expensive, seasoned, and utterly ruthless divorce attorney. He had been assiduously building his meticulously crafted exit strategy, complete with legal loopholes and tactical maneuvers, all while I was diligently meal prepping his favorite dishes and scheduling his mundane dentist appointments. I had been utterly blindsided, struck down by a man I had trusted implicitly, with every fiber of my being, with everything I held dear. The very next day, his mother made her grand entrance. Meredith Hayes, a woman who had, with practiced condescension, treated me like an inconveniently permanent household fixture for the entirety of our 15-year marriage, arrived with her impeccably coiffed hair and her perfectly rehearsed sympathy face. She patted my hand, her touch cool and detached, and delivered her unsolicited wisdom. I should have tried harder to keep him happy. "Men have needs." "Dear," she intoned, as if explaining a profoundly complex concept to a particularly slow-witted child. Lorraine's marital advice had always been a source of morbid fascination, especially considering her own husband spent 7 days a week meticulously avoiding her company on the golf course, ostensibly for his health. Yet, according to her, I was unequivocally the problem. That first week blurred into an agonizing haze of disbelief and despair. David, with cold, calculated efficiency, moved me from our shared master bedroom to the smaller guest room. He had documents swiftly drawn up, settlements brusquely proposed, rigid timelines relentlessly established. Everything was hurtling forward with a dizzying speed, and I felt as though I was inexorably drowning in a sea of legal jargon and crushing heartbreak. To everyone observing, I was a woman whose world had just spectacularly collapsed. I was a loyal wife being cruelly discarded after 15 years of unwavering service. I was a textbook victim who had tragically failed to see the inevitable coming. But here's the quiet, potent truth. What David, and indeed what absolutely nobody else knew, was that I had stumbled upon something truly damning 3 years prior. Something meticulously buried deep within his labyrinthine financial records. Something he believed was hidden forever, safe from prying eyes. And ever since that chilling discovery, I had been quietly, patiently, methodically preparing. Before we delve deeper into this story of betrayal and quiet retribution, if you find yourself captivated by Alexis's journey, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I genuinely read every single comment. Thank you. Now, back to the unfolding disaster. Within a mere week of David's abrupt announcement, he had asserted complete, tyrannical control over what was once our shared home. The guest room, once a welcoming space for visitors, became my stark, permanent residence. My closet, once a spacious walk-in, aggressively shrank to two small, desolate sections that he, with a show of magnanimous grace, allowed me to keep. The message was unequivocally clear, brutally delivered. This is no longer your house. This is his domain. Within 2 weeks, the humiliation escalated with the arrival of Tiffany Miller, 27 years old, of course, and working at his company, naturally. And she possessed that quintessential, curated, Instagram-perfect aesthetic, sun-kissed blonde highlights, impeccably manicured nails, and yoga pants that undoubtedly cost more than my entire week's worth of groceries. She sashayed into my kitchen, our kitchen, with an air of proprietary confidence, as if she had always belonged there. She even wore my apron, my grandmother's cherished apron, while blithely making smoothies in my blender. She was younger than my marriage, younger even than my favorite designer handbag, but I had to concede, with a bitter irony, she did make an undeniably amazing smoothie. So, I suppose that was something. David paraded her around like a newly acquired trophy, a glittering testament to his renewed desirability. They would recline on my couch, watch my television, and eat off my plates. He would sling his arm around her, right there in front of me, with an audacious nonchalance that suggested I was nothing more than an inanimate piece of furniture, an invisible fixture, as if I had already dematerialized into thin air. The daily indignities compounded, each one a fresh cut. First, he callously canceled my personal credit card. "We need to separate finances," he declared, his voice dripping with feigned reasonability. Then, the joint card vanished from my wallet. Finally, with a chillingly polite suggestion, he intimated that I should probably find somewhere else to stay, while we sorted things out. My own home, the very sanctuary I had helped build, nurtured, and made into a haven, and I was being asked to leave it. Lorraine, ever the dutiful meddler, swooped in to help me pack. And by help, I mean she meticulously sifted through my most cherished belongings, a self-appointed arbiter deciding what meager possessions I deserved to retain. Old clothes? Fine. Family photos? A carefully selected few. My grandmother's well-worn recipe box? She paused over that one, her fingers lingering, as if contemplating claiming it for herself. What I was emphatically not permitted to take were any pieces of jewelry David had ever purchased for me over our 15 years together, any furniture I had lovingly picked out, or indeed anything she deemed of actual value. "Those are marital assets," Lorraine imperiously explained, "and David is perfectly entitled to them." She proceeded to pack my life, my memories, into black garbage bags, not sturdy moving boxes, but flimsy, undignified garbage bags, as if I, and everything I possessed, was simply trash to be unceremoniously taken out. Through this relentless barrage of emotional and material dispossession, I clung to one steadfast belief. I had one person I could unequivocally trust: Jessica Walsh. We had been inseparable friends since high school, a bond forged over 20 years, weathering countless boyfriends, heart-wrenching breakups, the joys of babies, and every imaginable permutation of life's unpredictable tapestry. She was the very first person I called, my voice trembling after Vincent's crushing announcement. She enveloped me in a comforting cocoon of support, constantly checking in, always asking how I was managing to hold myself together, forever ready to lend an empathetic ear. She would arrive at the house with a bottle of my favorite wine, allowing me to weep freely onto her shoulder, offering solace and indignation in equal measure. She assured me I deserved so much better. She insisted that David was making the biggest mistake of his life. Yet, beneath the surface of her unwavering support, something subtle, something almost imperceptible began to feel off. Just little things, at first. David, it seemed, had an uncanny knack for knowing my plans even before I had fully articulated them. When I casually mentioned to Diane that I was contemplating a fierce fight for the house, Caleb came home the very next day, his young face troubled, reporting, Dad told him it wouldn't work. When I confided in Diane about scouting apartments in a specific quiet neighborhood, David, with a disconcerting precision, and made an offhand comment about that exact area being far too expensive for my new reduced circumstances. Then, with a chilling clarity, it clicked. Looking back with the unforgiving lens of hindsight, I realized I should have seen it years ago. The way Diane's face would subtly ignite, her eyes brightening just a fraction too much, whenever David entered a room. The way she would compliment him, her praise always a touch too effusive, her laughter at his mediocre jokes always a fraction too loud, too prolonged. And in our conversations, no matter the topic, she would invariably inquire about him first. How's David doing? How's the business progressing? Is David happy? She had been carrying a quiet, unrequited torch for my husband for a full 15 years, and David, a man who collected admirers with the same casual nonchalance that some people collect stamps, knew precisely how to exploit it. He made her feel uniquely special, indispensable, distinct from other women. He likely hinted at a future together after the divorce was finalized, whispering just enough empty promises to keep her fiercely loyal, to keep her feeding him information. My best friend, my confidant of 20 years, had become his spy. 20 years of shared history, sold out for a few meaningless flirtations and the hollow echo of a conditional future. At least charge more, Diane, I thought, a bitter, contemptuous laugh bubbling up inside me. But the most excruciating, soul-crushing part of this entire ordeal wasn't David's betrayal. It wasn't Lorraine's calculated cruelty. It wasn't even Diane's insidious treachery. The absolute worst part was Caleb, my son. He saw everything. He witnessed the brazen parade of the new girlfriend, the cold spectacle of his grandmother packing my belongings into garbage bags, the way his father looked at me, a gaze devoid of affection, devoid of recognition, as if I were nothing more than a ghost already haunting his opulent new life. And David, with a calculated, insidious cunning, was systematically working on him, dripping poison into his ear day after day. Your mom is making this incredibly difficult, son. He'd lament, his voice laced with feigned sorrow. I just want everyone to be happy, but she's the one dragging this whole thing out. I'm trying to be fair, truly, but she simply won't cooperate. Caleb, caught in the crossfire of this emotional warfare, slowly, perceptibly, began to pull away from me. Not angry, not overtly rebellious, just distant, confused, his young mind grappling with conflicting narratives. He didn't know who to believe, and his father, an undeniable master of manipulation, was profoundly, disturbingly convincing. I could foresee losing the house. I could envision losing all our accumulated money. I could lose every single thing I had spent 15 years painstakingly building, nurturing, and sacrificing for. But watching my son, my precious Caleb, begin to look at me as if I were the problem, as if I were the source of this seismic upheaval, that was the knife. That was the wound that truly, profoundly bled. In a desperate, defiant act, I hired a lawyer. Victoria Sterling, a name whispered with reverence and a healthy dose of fear among the legal circles of my old firm. 52 years old, her mind sharp as a freshly honed razor and possessing an absolute zero-tolerance policy for any form of nonsense or theatricality. She meticulously reviewed my seemingly hopeless situation, her piercing gaze missing nothing, and then, with unwavering resolve, laid out our battle plan. "You helped build this business, Mrs. Hayes," she declared, her voice firm and resonant. "You are unequivocally entitled to half of everything. The house, the company, the accounts. We fight." I met her gaze for a long, quiet moment, my own expression betraying nothing. "What?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. If I don't want to fight? Gabrielle stared at me, her sharp features registering a profound bewilderment, as if I had suddenly begun conversing in an alien language, as if I had just suggested we dispatch David a thank you card and a fruit basket for his magnanimity. She undoubtedly believed I was utterly broken, deeply depressed, too thoroughly beaten down to even contemplate standing up for myself. She had no idea. I moved into a small, sterile apartment with Caleb. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen roughly the size of my old pantry. Half of our remaining boxes didn't even fit, sitting forlornly stacked in the corner of Tyler's cramped room, a silent, mocking monument to how far, how irrevocably we had fallen. Meanwhile, David, utterly oblivious, continued his triumphant public performance. He posted glossy photos with Brittany on social media, accompanied by saccharine captions like, "New chapter, new energy, blessed." Lorraine, naturally, was among the first to comment underneath, her words dripping with performative affection. "So happy for you, sweetheart. You deserve joy." My sister, on the other hand, called me, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "You need a shark lawyer, Alexis. Take him for everything he's worth." Everyone had advice. Everyone, it seemed, thought they knew precisely what I should do. Everyone saw a woman who had simply given up, who lacked the fight, who was passively allowing her husband to walk all over her. Everyone, to put it plainly, was wrong. Here's the peculiar, potent truth about being consistently underestimated. People inevitably stop watching you. They cease to be careful in your presence. They lower their guard, believing you pose no threat, no challenge. And that, precisely, is when you learn everything you need to know. 3 years. That's how long I had been silently carrying this explosive secret. 3 years is how long I had known the unvarnished truth about Preston Hayes and his glittering, glamorous, utterly fabricated empire. It all began on a random Tuesday night, 3 years before Vincent's bombastic divorce announcement. David was predictably working late again. He was always working late by then, though at that point I hadn't yet deciphered the true sinister meaning behind his perpetual overtime. I was immersed in the tedious but necessary task of going through the company books, meticulously reconciling accounts, performing the unglamorous, often overlooked work that silently kept his entire precarious business afloat. And that's when I found something strange, a significant transfer to an account I didn't recognize. Then another, and another. Soon, a chilling pattern emerged, substantial sums of money systematically flowing out of our joint accounts into various obscure destinations I had never encountered before. I dug deeper. Driven by a gnawing suspicion that turned into icy dread, I stayed up until 3 a.m, meticulously tracing every convoluted trail of breadcrumbs. What I ultimately uncovered made my blood run cold, freezing in my veins with absolute horror. David had been clandestinely taking out multiple loans against everything we ostensibly owned, leveraging our entire life against an invisible, looming abyss. The house, our beautiful, sprawling house that everyone admired and coveted, the supposed cornerstone of our family's security, actually carried 3 mortgages. There was the original loan of $400,000, a second, hefty mortgage of $350,000, I'd taken out subtly 4 years prior, and a third, another $350,000, secured just 2 years ago. The total amount owed stood at a staggering $1.1 million. The actual market value of the house? A mere $850,000. We were unequivocally underwater by $250,000 on a home I had innocently believed we owned outright, a symbol of our shared success. The business, his cherished real estate empire, was in an even more dire state. Lines of credit were maxed out at a staggering $200,000. Back taxes, meticulously avoided, amounted to $85,000. Vendor debts lingered at $120,000. Equipment loans added another $75,000 to the mounting pile. The very company David so proudly bragged about at every lavish party, the company that was ostensibly thriving, was, in reality, drowning in nearly $500,000 of crippling debt. Even the cars, our fleet of luxury vehicles, weren't truly ours. All 3 were leased, with impending, terrifying balloon payments looming on the horizon. We didn't own anything of true value. We merely possessed a collection of very expensive monthly obligations, an elaborate facade of prosperity. I sat in our meticulously organized kitchen at 3 a.m, surrounded by a blizzard of printouts and financial statements, and painstakingly did the math. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Total actual asset value, optimistically, maybe $1.6 million. We were, at a minimum, $300,000 in the hole, possibly much more. But where, I agonized, where had all that staggering amount of money gone? I kept digging. Over the following weeks, fueled by a relentless, cold fury, I traced every single transaction I could unearth. And the picture that meticulously emerged was not just devastating. It was a testament to reckless self-destruction and profound betrayal. Cryptocurrency investments, $180,000, all irretrievably lost. Gambling debts, $75,000, vanished into the ether. An apartment I knew absolutely nothing about, rented specifically for a woman I knew even less about. $60,000 squandered on rent and furnishings. Then there were the myriad lifestyle expenses that never made their way home, never benefited our family. Extravagant watches, custom-tailored suits, luxurious trips I was never invited on. Another $85,000, simply gone. My husband wasn't building a real estate empire. He was meticulously constructing a precarious house of cards, made with borrowed cards that were, horrifyingly, already on fire. We looked rich in the same deceptive way a mannequin looks alive, convincing and impressive from a distance, but utterly hollow, profoundly empty, and lifeless up close. My first visceral instinct was to confront him, to scream, to cry, to demand immediate, agonizing answers, to shatter his illusion with the blunt force of truth. But I knew David. I had observed his manipulative tactics, his emotional judo, for years. If I confronted him, he wouldn't confess or repent. He would expertly twist my words, manipulate the narrative, explain it all away with a smooth, plausible lie, making me feel utterly crazy for even daring to question him. He would, in all likelihood, find a cunning way to blame me for his catastrophic financial mismanagement. And worse, far worse, if he knew that I knew, he might then attempt to seize control of my separate, carefully protected money, too. You see, I had always, diligently, instinctively, kept a little something of my own. My grandmother's resonant voice was a constant guiding presence in my head. A woman should always have her own money. My IRA, diligently built during my years at the law firm, I had rolled it over when I quit, but I had never once touched it. By then, through careful management and smart investments, it had grown to a respectable $180,000. That was mine. Earned from my honest labor, it was legally recognized as separate property under the law. And then there was Grandma herself. She had passed away when I was 28, leaving me a substantial inheritance of $340,000. Her will was meticulously specific. This money is for Alexis alone. I had kept it in a completely separate account for 6 years, never commingling it with Vincent's finances, never once dipping into it for household expenses or joint ventures. My grandmother, bless her wise soul, had maintained her own separate account for 50 years. Not secret money, she would always say, a twinkle in her eye, just mine. She was, unequivocally, the smartest woman I had ever known. With my IRA and my inheritance, I had roughly $520,000 that was completely, legally, and inviolably mine. So I didn't confront David. Instead, I quietly, meticulously protected myself. I enlisted the help of my uncle, a sharp, no-nonsense retired accountant, to create an irrevocable trust for Caleb. My IRA and my inheritance, every single dollar, went into that trust. My name wasn't on it as a beneficiary. Vincent's name certainly wasn't on it. It was designated solely for Tyler's future, his college education, a down payment for his first home, unforeseen emergencies, and crucially, it was untouchable. Then, I documented everything. Every single mortgage document, every cryptic hidden account, every suspicious transaction. I printed multiple copies and meticulously safeguarded them at my sister's house. I placed additional copies in a secure safe deposit box. I saved everything, digitally, on an encrypted hard drive. And then, I waited. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that David would eventually leave. Men like him always do. They grow bored, they find someone younger, someone new, or they simply decide they deserve more. I just had to be ready, fully prepared, when that inevitable day arrived. 3 agonizing years of waiting. 3 years of silently watching him dig his financial hole deeper and deeper. 3 years of smiling blandly at dinner parties, exchanging pleasantries with acquaintances, all the while knowing that our entire glittering life was meticulously constructed on quicksand, on the verge of collapsing. I became incredibly adept at patience and disturbingly proficient at pretending I was utterly oblivious to the fact that my husband was financially drowning us both. So, when David finally did ask for the divorce, when he brazenly demanded the house, the cars, the business, everything, I very nearly laughed out loud. He wasn't asking for assets. He was, with breathtaking ignorance, demanding debt. He just didn't know it yet. Back in the present, I sat poised across from Victoria Sterling, her formidable presence filling the small office. With a deliberate, almost theatrical gesture, I placed 3 thick binders on her desk. 3 years of meticulously collected evidence, every mortgage document, every damning loan statement, every record of every hidden account. She began to read, her expression initially skeptical, then gradually shifting, her sharp eyes scanning the pages in silence for almost an hour. When she finally looked up, her face had completely transformed. The initial weariness had vanished, replaced by an unmistakable flicker of something akin to incredulous awe. "You've known about this for 3 years?" she asked, her voice hushed with disbelief. My gaze met hers steadily. "I was waiting for him to leave, Gabrielle," I explained, my voice calm, almost detached. "I knew he would, eventually, and when he demanded everything, he unwittingly demanded all the debt. He just doesn't understand that yet." Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, a slow exhale escaping her lips. The pity, the weary concern that had clouded her eyes during our initial meetings had evaporated entirely. What now replaced it was pure, unadulterated awe. "So," she began, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, "when you sign over the assets, you walk away clean. He gets the mortgages, the business debts, the lease obligations, all of it becomes his sole responsibility. And your inheritance, your retirement account, completely separate property, never commingled, legally protected, sitting safely in a trust for your son." Gabrielle remained quiet for a long, reflective moment. Then, a slow, dangerous smile, and one that promised retribution, spread across her face. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice laced with a newfound respect, "I believe I owe you a profound apology. I truly thought you'd given up." I returned her smile, a genuine, triumphant one this time. "Everyone thinks that, Gabrielle," I replied, the words a quiet declaration. That's kind of the point. Nina's expression morphed from one of pity for a lost kitten to one of profound respect for a chess grandmaster. "I definitely prefer grandmaster," I quipped, a wry smile playing on my lips. "Better outfit for sure." The trap was already meticulously built. The numbers had been rigorously verified. The documentation was absolutely airtight. All I had to do now was allow David to continue basking in the glorious illusion that he was unequivocally winning. And nobody, absolutely nobody, could play the part of a gracious loser better than a woman who had been diligently practicing that role for 15 long, arduous years. The following 3 months became a masterclass in deceptive acting, a carefully orchestrated performance for an audience of one. I meticulously cultivated the persona everyone expected me to be, broken, utterly defeated, barely clinging to the frayed edges of my sanity. I showed up to mediation sessions with eyes deliberately reddened from lack of sleep and strategically trembling hands. I spoke softly, hesitantly, my voice a whisper, like a woman whose confidence had been utterly shattered. My requests were so ridiculously modest, so minimal, that even the seasoned mediator seemed visibly uncomfortable, shifting uneasily in his chair. "I just want enough to start over," I'd say during our second mediation session, my voice carefully crafted to convey fragility. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I know the business is his life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I don't want to tear our family apart more than it already is. I requested a paltry settlement of $50,000 cash, my personal belongings, and shared custody of Caleb. That was it." David predictably agreed immediately, his face alight with smug triumph. He was undoubtedly anticipating a bitter, protracted battle for half of everything, the standard demand any reasonable lawyer would make. Instead, I was asking for crumbs. He looked at me across that mediation table with something bordering on pity, as if I were a wounded animal he was graciously putting out of its misery. I deserved an Oscar for that performance, or at the very least, a Golden Globe. I had been given the role of a lifetime, and my only unwitting audience was my lying, cheating, and soon to be utterly bankrupt ex husband. With each passing week, David's arrogance inflated, growing to grotesque proportions. He stopped being careful, stopped even pretending to be the reasonable, amicable party. He began to broadcast his victory to anyone who would listen, his voice dripping with self congratulatory pride. She just gave up. He'd casually inform his golf buddies, a dismissive wave of his hand. I offered her a fair settlement, and she took it without a word, didn't even put up a fight. Lorraine, predictably, was even worse. She regaled her book club, her church group, and in every social gathering she attended with exaggerated tales of David's cunning and my supposed weakness. David is keeping everything, darling, she'd crow, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. That woman didn't get a dime. I always knew she wasn't strong enough for my son. To prematurely celebrate his impending, undisputed victory, David indulged himself with a brand new, ostentatious watch, a piece that set him back a cool $15,000. I knew this precise figure because I saw the charge brazenly appear on the business account. He was still, even now, shamelessly using company money for personal expenses, still digging that financial hole deeper, with gleeful abandon. He wore the gleaming timepiece to our next mediation session, making sure my gaze lingered on it, a silent, taunting display of his perceived dominance. He also took Brittany to dinner at Le Jardin, the very French restaurant where we had celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. He then proceeded to post a series of nauseatingly saccharine photos on social media, captioned with sickening sentiment. Life is good when you're with the right person. The right person, of course, meant the person who was still blissfully unaware of his crushing, impending debt. Meanwhile, Brittany, with a frightening sense of ownership, had already commenced redecorating my house. New, impersonal furniture now cluttered the living room. Unfamiliar, avant-garde art pieces adorned the walls. She even, with a breathtaking audacity, painted my kitchen gray. She painted it gray. I had spent 3 painstaking weeks meticulously choosing that particular shade of sage green. 3 weeks of agonizing over countless paint samples, testing them under various lighting conditions, driving myself to the brink of insanity to achieve the absolute perfect hue. And she, with a callous disregard for my efforts, painted right over it with builder-grade gray, as if it were nothing. Gray, I mused with a bitter satisfaction, just like her personality. Gray like her inevitable, desolate future with David once she discovered he was utterly broke. Very fitting, actually. Diane, ever the eager spy, continued her persistent calls, fishing for information under the thin guise of concerned friendship. I played along perfectly, effortlessly. "How are you holding up, Alexis?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical fake concern. "I just want it to be over, Diane," I'd tell her, deliberately allowing my voice to crack slightly, conveying a fragile exhaustion. "I can't fight anymore. I simply don't have the energy left." Within hours, I knew David would have received the full report, verbatim. I could practically visualize him relaxing, letting his guard down even further, his arrogance growing by the minute. Diane truly believed she was playing me, a cunning operative manipulating her unsuspecting target. In reality, she was merely an unwitting messenger service, and not a particularly expensive one at that. But while the adults were engrossed in their elaborate, self-serving games, Caleb was watching. And my son, my smart, incredibly observant, wonderful son, was beginning to notice things that simply did not add up. He noticed his father's new gleaming $15,000 watch, but then heard David tell him, with a sigh, that they couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. He noticed Brittany's designer shopping bags piling up in the foyer of our old home, but then heard David complain with a frown about money being tight. He noticed the glaring, ever-widening disconnect between the lavish, effortless lifestyle his father was so strenuously projecting and the constant, flimsy excuses he kept making. One quiet evening, Caleb came to my tiny, secondhand apartment and sat down at my rickety secondhand kitchen table. He looked at me with those serious, knowing eyes, so much like his father's in their shape and color, but possessing something David had irretrievably lost long, long ago, a profound, unwavering integrity. "Honesty, Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the usual boisterous confidence of a 15-year-old. "Is Dad actually rich?" I looked at my son, truly looked at him, for a long, heavy moment. His eyes, so serious and knowing, searched mine, and I saw a wisdom there that both thrilled and saddened me. It was the question I had anticipated, the one I had silently been preparing him for, even as I prepared for the final battle. "What do you think?" I countered softly, watching the wheels turn in his brilliant mind. He was quiet, processing, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence stretched, filled only with the faint hum of the ancient refrigerator. "I think something's not right," he finally murmured, the conclusion drawn with a clarity that surpassed even mine at his age. "I think he's pretending." A surge of pride mixed with a pang of regret washed over me. My son, my incredibly perceptive son. I reached across the rickety table, my fingers finding his, squeezing gently. "Trust me, Caleb," I said, my voice steady. "Just wait a little longer." My 15-year-old had figured out what two supposedly sharp lawyers and a certified accountant had either missed or chosen to ignore. Sometimes, common sense, untainted by legal jargon, or a desire to believe a successful facade, was the sharpest tool. I should bill his college fund for consulting fees, I mused, a small, wry smile touching my lips. Behind the scenes, the true architect of our liberation, Gabrielle, was preparing our legal strategy with the precision of a surgeon. The main divorce agreement, a document David had gleefully pushed for, stated clearly that I was relinquishing all claims to marital property. The sprawling family home, the lucrative real estate development business he had built, with my tireless, unacknowledged support, the fleet of luxury vehicles, everything would go to David. In exchange, I would receive a modest cash settlement and, as he so crudely put it, walk away. He thought he was getting off easy. He thought he was winning. But attached to that agreement, a seemingly innocuous detail, was an addendum, a detailed liability disclosure statement, several pages thick, outlining every single debt, every outstanding mortgage, every commercial loan, every lease obligation tied to those seemingly valuable assets. It was a Trojan horse, meticulously crafted. When David signed for all assets, he would be legally assuming all liabilities. The crushing mortgages on the house and business properties would become his sole responsibility. The labyrinthine business debts would transfer entirely to him. The exorbitant lease obligations on the cars, which he flaunted like trophies, would become his problem alone. It was all there, in black and white, perfectly legal, impeccably proper, and utterly, irrevocably devastating. "Legal documents are like poetry," Gabrielle had told me with a dry wit, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee in her office late one night. "Boring, expensive poetry that can ruin someone's life. My favorite kind." I had learned to love that kind of poetry, too. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Vincent's lawyer, Robert Maxwell, a man with a reputation for meticulousness and a slight nervous cough, called Gabrielle with concerns. "My client is assuming significant assets," Robert said, his tone carefully neutral, but I could imagine the subtle tightening of his jaw. "I'd like to request a full financial audit before we finalize, just to verify everything." Gabrielle kept her voice equally neutral, a master of diplomatic understatement. "Of course, Robert. We'll provide whatever documentation you need." She knew he would never get it. When Robert, dutifully attempting to protect his oblivious client, brought this reasonable request to David, my soon-to-be ex-husband shut it down immediately. The very idea seemed to offend him. "No audits," David had scoffed, his arrogance blooming like a noxious weed. "I built that company. I know exactly what it's worth. I'm not paying for some accountant to tell me what I already know." Robert, clearly sensing a looming disaster, pushed back. "Mr. Sterling, I strongly recommend we verify the asset values before you sign. This is a significant—" David cut him off, impatient and dismissive. "Brittany wants this done. I want this done. No more delays." Robert Maxwell had been practicing law for over 30 years. He knew the distinct scent of a client about to make a catastrophic mistake. He also knew he couldn't physically force someone to take his advice, particularly a man as pig-headed and self-assured as David. So, with a deep sigh, he presented David with a waiver, a standard legal document acknowledging that Robert had indeed recommended an independent financial review and that David was expressly declining it against his counsel's professional advice. David signed it without so much as a glance, eager to be done with the tedious paperwork and get back to his exciting new life. Just like he'd sign everything else without reading it, without truly understanding the implications. Never underestimate the corrosive power of an impatient, materialistic girlfriend to make a man skip the fine print that will ultimately destroy him. Brittany, in her heedless quest for speed, was worth millions to me in legal strategy. The night before the hearing, as I lay in my modest secondhand bed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Vincent. "Thank you for not making this ugly." I stared at that message for a long, long time, the words burning themselves into my memory. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building his business from the ground up, raising his son, managing his entire life down to his sock drawer. And he was thanking me for not making things difficult for him while he summarily threw me away like an old, worn-out garment. The gall was breathtaking. The ignorance, even more so. I typed back a single, precise sentence. "I just want what's best for Tyler." That was the truth, the core of my resilience, the unwavering North Star of my plan. What was best for Tyler? His trust fund, a substantial $520,000, safe and untouchable, his future irrevocably secured, and a father who was about to learn the most expensive, most humiliating lesson of his life, a lesson he so desperately needed to learn. Nina called me that evening, her voice calm and steady. "Thursday at 9 a.m., final hearing. Judge Patricia Holden. Are you ready?" I looked around my small apartment, a haven of quiet determination. The secondhand furniture, lovingly polished and arranged. The boxes, still mostly unpacked in the corner, holding remnants of a past life I was ready to shed. The tiny kitchen, which I'd painted a soft, hopeful sage green because it reminded me of growth, of new beginnings. "I've been ready for 3 years," I replied, a quiet strength in my voice. 3 years of patience, of meticulous planning, of silent waiting, and it was finally here. I felt a strange exhilaration, like a kid on Christmas morning, if Christmas morning involved the solemnity of divorce court and the exquisite satisfaction of financial revenge. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Vincent would walk into that courtroom expecting to collect his glittering prize, unaware he was about to inherit a financial avalanche. One he had not only signed for himself, but had, in his own arrogant haste, effectively requested in writing, with witnesses. Every detail of that morning is etched into my memory. The way the spring sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows of courtroom 4B, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air, the faint, comforting smell of old wood and floor polish, a scent of history and solemnity, the quiet murmur of lawyers shuffling papers, a hushed prelude to the drama about to unfold. This was where 15 years of marriage would officially end and where 3 years of patience, of quiet sacrifice, would finally pay off. Vincent arrived first, of course, striding in with the unshakable confidence of a man destined for victory. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal Armani I'd helped him pick out for a crucial client dinner 3 years ago. His new ostentatious watch, a recent acquisition clearly meant to impress Brittany, caught the light as he shook hands with Harold, his lawyer. He looked relaxed, supremely self-assured, like a man about to close a very favorable deal, not a marriage. Brittany was waiting in the hallway, a sentinel of superficiality. She wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but she wanted to be there for moral support, or, more likely, to witness her ascension to the throne. I caught a glimpse of her through the door. Perfect makeup, a designer bag clutched in her hand, scrolling through her phone like this was just another boring appointment she had to endure. Lorraine, Vincent's mother, was there too, sitting in the gallery, her expression a triumphant smirk. She was dressed up for the occasion, as if attending a coronation, probably planning to take Vincent to a celebratory lunch afterward. She caught my eye as I walked in and gave me a little smile, the kind you give someone you've already thoroughly beaten, a smug, saccharine twist of the lips. I arrived a few minutes after Vincent. I wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, my hair pulled back in a low bun. I cultivated an image of exhaustion, of quiet defeat, like a woman who had nothing left to fight for, who simply wanted this ordeal to be over. Perfect. I looked like someone who had given up on life and fashion simultaneously, utterly convincing in my vulnerability. I thought perhaps I should really teach acting classes. Judge Patricia Holden entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. She was in her early 60s, armed with a cap of neatly styled silver hair, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. 30 years on the family court bench had made her an unshakable arbiter of human drama. She'd seen every trick, every manipulation, every lie divorcing couples could hurl at each other. Nothing surprised her anymore. Her eyes held the weary wisdom of 1,000 broken promises. She reviewed the case file briefly, her gaze sweeping across the room, taking in each participant before settling on the table before her. Mercer versus Mercer, she announced, her voice calm, authoritative. Final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Harold Whitfield stood first, a dutiful but clearly uneasy advocate. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Vincent Mercer, is assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, the real estate development business, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Dunst receives a cash settlement of $50,000. Nina rose beside me, her posture erect, her expression impassive. That's correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to these assets and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Holden's piercing eyes moved to me, studying my face for a long moment, searching for signs of coercion, of duress. I imagined she was looking for any hint that I was being pressured into a terrible deal, that I was making a decision I would regret. Mrs. Dunst, she said, her voice kind but firm, I need to confirm that you understand what you're agreeing to today. You're giving up your claim to substantial property, the family home, the business you helped build from the ground up. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I kept my voice soft, just a touch unsteady, portraying the weariness of a woman who had fought long and hard, only to concede. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you're entering this agreement voluntarily? She pressed, her gaze unwavering. No one is pressuring you into this? No, Your Honor. I looked down at my hands, clasped demurely in my lap, then back up at her, meeting her gaze with a carefully constructed sincerity. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge studied me for another long, thoughtful moment. I could practically see her internal debate, whether to push harder, whether to order a continuance, whether to protect me from what, on the surface, looked like a profoundly terrible decision. But I was represented by competent counsel. I was answering clearly and unequivocally. I was an adult woman, appearing rational and in control, making my own choice. Very well, she said finally, a note of resignation in her voice. Let's proceed. The clerk distributed the final documents, page after page of dense legal language, with signature lines appearing on every third page, a bureaucratic marathon. Vincent signed eagerly, almost violently, his pen scratching across the paper, barely glancing at what he was agreeing to. He wanted this done. He wanted to get back to his new life, his new girlfriend, his new, unburdened freedom. I signed slowly, deliberately, my hand steady, my grip firm. Every stroke of my pen was careful and precise, each signature a punctuation mark on 3 years of patient waiting. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, preparing for. I was going to savor it. Across the courtroom, I saw Vincent glance at Lorraine and flash a triumphant smile. She nodded back approvingly, a silent congratulation. In the hallway, his phone buzzed. Probably Brittany sending encouragement. He checked his phone right there in court, during his own divorce hearing. That, I thought, was the kind of man he truly was. Meanwhile, Harold Whitfield, the consummate professional, was doing what good lawyers do. He was reviewing the complete document package one final time, a last-minute sweep for errors. Main agreement signed, asset schedule signed, settlement terms signed. He breathed a subtle sigh of relief. Then he reached the addendum. The liability disclosure statement. I watched his face as he read. I watched the confusion flicker across his features, then a dawning horror. I watched him flip back a page, then forward again, like he was hoping he had misread something, that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He hadn't. Harold's face went utterly pale. He leaned toward Vincent, trying desperately to be discreet, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Sir, he said, we need to talk. Vincent, still basking in his premature victory, waved him off with a dismissive flick of his hand. Not now. We're almost done. Sir! Harold's voice was more urgent now, a desperate hiss. You're assuming all debt. Vincent finally turned to look at him, annoyance replacing triumph. What are you talking about? The liability disclosure, Harold whispered, papers rustling as his trembling finger pointed to a column of figures. The mortgages, the business lines, the unsecured loans. It's all here. You're assuming personal liability for everything. For the very first time, Vincent actually looked at what he had signed. I watched his eyes scan the numbers, watched the color drain from his face as if by a hidden stopper. House, $1.1 million owed. Market value, $850,000. Business, $480,000 in combined debts. Vehicles, $115,000 in lease obligations and loans. Additional personal liabilities, including his secret gambling debts and investments, $200,000. Total debt approximately $1.9 million. Net value of everything he had just gleefully claimed as his prize, negative $300,000. He hadn't won the lottery, he'd won the bill for it, the staggering, ruinous bill. Vincent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the polished courtroom floor. A sound that echoed through the sudden silence. "This isn't right!" he exclaimed, his voice raw with disbelief, bordering on a shout. He looked at me, then at the judge, then back at the damning papers. "She hid this from me? This is fraud!" Judge Holden's voice was sharp, cutting through his rising panic. "Mr. Mercer, sit down." "These numbers are fake," Vincent insisted, his voice rising in volume and pitch. "She manipulated the documents. This is Mr. Mercer." The judge's tone, though still calm, left no room for argument. "Sit down." He sat, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably, trembling visibly as he gripped the edge of the table. His confident, smug smile was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like sheer, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted around the room, a cornered animal. Judge Holden looked at the documents in front of her, then fixed her gaze on Vincent, her expression utterly impassive. "Mr. Mercer, I'm looking at the liability disclosure statement attached to this agreement. These are debts associated with assets you are claiming. Assets in your name, your business, your property. These are the figures from the banks, from the lenders, from the Department of Motor Vehicles." She fixed him with a hard, unwavering stare. "Are you telling this court that you don't know your own financial situation?" Silence hung heavy in the air. Watching Vincent try to explain why he, the self-proclaimed titan of industry, didn't know about his own monumental debts was like watching a cat try to explain why there was a broken vase on the floor. Fascinating in its absurdity, utterly unconvincing in its delivery, and ultimately deeply pathetic. He sputtered, he stammered, his face a kaleidoscope of fear and denial. Harold Whitfield cleared his throat, seizing the opportunity to distance himself from his client's self-inflicted wound. "Your Honor," he stated, his voice now firm and professional, "I should note that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review prior to this hearing. He explicitly declined. He produced a document from his folder, the waiver, the very one Vincent had signed without reading. It stated, in clear, unambiguous legal language, that Harold had recommended a full audit, and Vincent had refused. Judge Holden reviewed it briefly, her gaze flickering from the paper to Vincent, then back. So, Mr. Mercer was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He signed a waiver, acknowledging that choice. She looked at Vincent again, her eyes piercing. "Is that correct?" Vincent was staring at the waiver like it was a venomous snake that had just bitten him. Its fangs sunk deep. He didn't, he thought. He couldn't have. "Is that your signature, Mr. Mercer?" the judge asked, her voice patiently relentless. A long, agonizing pause. "Yes," he finally croaked, the sound barely audible. "Then you assumed this risk voluntarily." Judge Holden's voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of judgment, simply stating the undeniable truth. "You had the opportunity to investigate. You chose not to. The agreement stands." Vincent turned to me then, desperation breaking through the last vestiges of his composure. "You knew," he accused, his voice cracking, thick with a sudden dawning terror. "You knew about all of this." I met his eyes calmly, my own utterly still. "I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Vincent," I said, my voice quiet but firm, each word a hammer blow. I knew about everything. His face cycled through emotions faster than I could count. Confusion, then pure, unadulterated rage, followed swiftly by a raw sense of betrayal, then fear, cold and stark, and finally, the one I had been waiting for, the one that made 3 years of patient suffering worthwhile, realization, the dawning, crushing understanding that he had done this, every single bit of it, to himself. "I want to withdraw the agreement Vincent blurted out, turning back to the judge, his voice desperate. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Holden shook her head, a silent, absolute negation. Mr. Mercer, you signed documents before this court stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel. You declined additional review when advised. Your wife did not hide anything. These liabilities are clearly disclosed in the addendum and are tied to assets in your name, your business, your obligations. She paused, letting the finality hang in the air. The agreement is final. The gavel came down with a sharp, resonant thud, echoing through the stunned courtroom. Mrs. Dunst, you have your settlement. Mr. Mercer, you have the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood, smoothing the simple navy dress, picking up my purse. A quiet sense of closure settled over me, profound and deeply satisfying. Then I looked at Vincent one last time. He was slumped in his chair, papers scattered in front of him like the shattered fragments of his world. You said you wanted everything except Tyler, I said quietly, my voice carrying just to him, a whisper of poetic justice. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back, each step lighter than the last. In the hallway, I could already hear Vincent's voice rising, a frantic, desperate wail, yelling at Harold, demanding to know how this could have happened, threatening lawsuits. Harold's calm responses drifted to me. I told you to get an audit, Mr. Mercer. I have it in writing. You refused. Through the glass doors, I saw Brittany's perfectly made-up face contort as she listened. I watched her look at Vincent, truly look at him, and see something other than the successful, that wealthy businessman she'd thought she was getting. She was gone before I reached the elevator, moving fast, her designer heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the marble floor, not looking back even once. Brittany's exit was faster and more decisive than her entrance into my marriage. At least, I thought, she was consistent. I stepped outside into the bright April sunshine. The sky was an impossibly clear blue, the air warm and sweet with the scent of budding trees. Somewhere behind me, my ex-husband was screaming at his lawyer about fairness and fraud and how none of this was his fault. Ahead of me was a new life, smaller than before, simpler, perhaps even a little daunting, but completely, entirely, gloriously mine. The collapse happened faster than even I, in my most hopeful imaginings, had expected. Within 2 weeks, Brittany had moved out of the house. She packed her things in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a terse, handwritten note that read, "This isn't what I signed up for." The once gleaming gray kitchen, her pet project, sat cold and empty. Within a month, Vincent, in a desperate bid to staunch the bleeding, tried to sell the house. But when you owe significantly more on a property than it's worth, there are no buyers, only banks calling relentlessly about missed payments and realtors suggesting humiliating short sales. The illusion of his empire was already cracking. Within 2 months, the real estate business started defaulting. Vendors filed lawsuits, suppliers demanded payment, and the line of credit, once so freely extended, was frozen solid. The company that Vincent had spent 15 years building. The company I had spent 11 years supporting with my blood, sweat, and intellect was crumbling into dust around him. Within 3 months, Vincent was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys, his once swaggering demeanor replaced by a haggard, hunted look. The man who'd once bragged about his vast empire was now calculating which meager assets he could possibly protect from a swarm of eager creditors. The answer, as it turned out, was almost nothing. Lorraine's perfect son was calling family members, pleading for loans, showing up at relatives' houses with endless excuses and elaborate explanations. Nobody knew about the debt, he'd whine. Alexis must have hidden it somehow. I was tricked. But the documents, those boring, expensive poems, told a different, irrefutable story. The mortgages were in his name. The loans were in his name. The gambling debts, the disastrous crypto losses, the secret apartment he'd rented for Brittany. All his choices, all his signatures, all his consequences. I heard that Lorraine's Christmas newsletter that year was remarkably short. Vincent is exploring new opportunities, it vaguely stated. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring and personal insolvency. The parallel conflicts, the minor betrayals alongside the major ones, resolve themselves with a kind of poetic symmetry. Diane called me about a week after the hearing. Her voice was shaking, thick with belated guilt. I had no idea things were this bad, Alexis. I'm so sorry. I never meant for. I thought Vincent and I. Her words dissolved into a muddled, self serving apology. I didn't answer. I didn't respond. I didn't give her the closure she was so desperately seeking. Some bridges aren't meant to be repaired. Some friendships, once irrevocably shattered by disloyalty and callous disregard, don't deserve a second chance. 20 years of shared history, betrayed for a wink and empty promises from a man who had skillfully used everyone around him. She tried calling 3 more times, then she stopped. I imagine she's still waiting for Vincent to notice her, to pull her into his orbit again. She'll be waiting a long, long time. Lorraine, ever the strategist, tried a different approach, going through Tyler. Tell your mother I didn't know about the money problems, she instructed him, her voice oozing with false contrition. Tell her I'm sorry for how I treated her. Tell her I want to talk. Tyler, my wonderful, smart, observant son, looked at his grandmother, the woman who'd packed his mother's belongings in garbage bags, who'd called his mother worthless, who'd sided with his father without a single question, and calmly said, Mom's busy building her life. She doesn't have time for excuses. Lorraine wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. Guess which one of us got what we wanted? Tyler, my wonderful, smart, observant son. He finally understood everything. Not because I explained it, but because he figured it out himself, piece by agonizing piece. He saw the court documents. He heard his father's increasingly desperate excuses. He watched Brittany leave without a backward glance. He watched Lorraine scramble, her carefully constructed image of family loyalty crumbling. He watched the whole facade collapse. One evening, about a month after the divorce, he sat with me in my small apartment, the one with the sage green kitchen, its hopeful color a quiet promise, the one with the secondhand furniture finally arranged into a cozy sanctuary. The boxes, at last, unpacked, their contents finding new homes. You waited 3 years, he said quietly, his gaze steady on mine. You knew this whole time, and you just waited. I wanted to make sure you were protected, I told him, reaching for his hand. Whatever happened between your father and me, I needed to know you'd be okay. The trust fund, $520,000, safe and untouchable, a solid foundation for his future. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of my words, the depth of my sacrifice. Then he hugged me, really hugged me. The kind of hug I hadn't gotten from my 15-year-old son in months, a rare and precious show of affection. The kind that said, I understand. The kind that said, I'm proud of you. 15-year-old boys don't usually hug their mothers voluntarily, especially not like that. In that moment, I knew I'd done something profoundly right. My $50,000 settlement, modest but sufficient, went toward getting established. First month's rent, security deposit, basic furniture that wasn't falling apart. It wasn't luxury, but it was stability, a solid ground beneath my feet. The trust fund stayed exactly where it was, growing, compounding. Tyler's future, college, perhaps a first home someday, a safety net that nobody, least of all his father, could ever take from him. And me? I enrolled in interior design courses at the community college, the dream I'd put on hold when I was 23, when I chose to help Vincent build his empire instead of pursuing my own creative path. I was finally building mine. I started small, taking hesitant but determined steps. My first real client was a woman named Sandra, 52 years old, just ending a 28-year marriage herself. She was standing in her empty new apartment, looking utterly lost when she asked me, her voice trembling, "How do you start over?" I thought about it for a moment, a lifetime of experience compressed into that question. One room at a time, I said softly, looking around her blank canvas of a living space, one color at a time, one day at a time. We started with her kitchen. We painted it sage green. She cried when she saw it, quiet, happy tears. The color of new beginnings, she whispered, touching the wall with a reverence that spoke of deep, personal renewal. We were both starting over, one sage green kitchen at a time. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Vincent showed up at my apartment. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, not the healthy, intentional kind, but the gaunt, stressed sort. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His expensive suit was rumpled and ill-fitting. His new watch, the one that had caught the light in the courtroom, was gone, replaced by a bare wrist. He looked like a man who'd been through a war and lost. He stood in my doorway, and for a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I didn't know it was this bad, he rasped, his voice hoarse, hollow. I made mistakes, I know that now. But I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I leaned against my doorframe, arms crossed, and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd loved for almost half my life. This man who'd thrown me away like garbage. This man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. A self-made shipwreck. Can we talk? He asked, his voice pleading. Maybe we can figure something out. I don't know, maybe we could. He couldn't even finish the sentence. He couldn't bring himself to ask for what he actually wanted. Help. My help. After everything. You asked for everything except Tyler, I said calmly, my voice steady, uncompromising. You got exactly what you wanted. Alexis, please, he begged, a desperate, broken sound. Goodbye, Vincent. I closed the door quietly, firmly. He stood in the hallway for a full 10 minutes. I know because I watched him through the peephole while eating a bowl of ice cream and savoring every spoonful. It was the best show I'd ever seen. 5 stars. Would watch again. That evening, after Tyler went to bed, I sat in my small living room and looked at my grandmother's photo on the shelf. The recipe box, the one thing Lorraine had almost taken from me, sat next to it, sturdy and reassuring. The one thing that mattered most, a tangible link to my own lineage of strong women. You were right about everything, Grandma, I said quietly into the still apartment. Keep your own money, know your worth, and never ever let anyone make you feel small. The apartment was quiet, small, nothing like the sprawling house I'd lived in for 15 years. But it was mine. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision, every quiet breath I took, it was all mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was free.